DCM works, I'm sick again, which seems incredibly unfair. Hey guys, welcome back to the Art for Artists podcast, official podcast of Digital and Creative Media Works. My name is David, DCM, also known as DCM I Hate Pie. Just a little funny for that one.
What the fuck was that?
I fucked up. I panicked. I'm joined as always by my co-host Ben.
Oh my god.
And this week we are talking about...
Hotline Miami.
What are we talking about in Hotline Miami?
Storytelling of Hotline
Storytelling of Hotline Miami. So,
real talk.
it's a game. It's a video game.
I love this game.
Yeah, I'm bad at it.
Yeah, so...
To the point where
influence of this game was David was like, oh, play Hotline Miami.
Yeah.
And I ended up finishing it
Well, because we did Drunk Souls, and then
we were very tired.
We're very tired, and we're like, let's just kick it around. And
Yeah.
I was like, well, I want to see how this game ends, but I'm not good enough to beat it. So can you play Hotline
Yeah,
Miami?
so I played it.
So you played it, and I watched you beat it with seemingly little effort.
Yeah, so I love Hotline Miami.
It's so can you explain what kind of a game it is?
So it is a very interesting top-down kind of action game. It's got a very sort of in-your-face, extravagant art style. It's all pixel-based.
Very gory.
But it's very gory, and the whole screen like tilts slightly with the music.
Heads in, you stab them in the throat.
The soundtrack is like fucking just rage-inducing.
Shotgun people to pieces.
Yeah, and the whole game is just a fucking fever dream.
It's brutal, mate.
And it's probably one of the more interesting examples of a unreliable narrator in games, which is hard to do because when you're making a game, you're playing as a certain character, you're kind of relying on them to be reliable. You know, because you're actively controlling them, it's really hard to portray a character who is unreliable without the player feeling disconnected, without it feeling obvious that the player character is like has their own free will and you have no control over their actions. But Hotline Miami does a really good job of going, you are in control, you are the one doing all of this. And then by doing that and then creating an unreliable narrator, it makes you as the player feel like you don't really know what's happening and you don't understand why everything's going this way. But then, you know, towards the end of the game, it
slowly sinks in.
It basically tells you, it drops bombs, which at first you don't notice, but when you go back and you sort of and you look at everything that happened and you look at everything that you were told, one of the, in my opinion, Hotline Miami 1 is all about questions. We're kind of ignoring the sequel, Hotline Miami 2. Yeah. It is important for the story, but looking at the first game on its own, it's all about questions. If you include the second game, the first game's kind of just... It's just a point on a map. Like, it's really insignificant part of the actual story. Yeah. Which is kind of unfortunate. It's kind of why I'm just using the first game. So, spoilers for the first game. Probably won't talk about the second game.
Yeah, well, I also haven't played the second game.
Yeah, like, I've played it once. I haven't played it in a while, though. So, it's kind of figure out what happens. Yeah. So, in Hotline Miami, there's 2 player characters. And they don't have names. You don't really know who they are. Even in the game's code, they're known as just player. Yeah. But their unofficial names, there's Jacket and Biker. So Jacket is your first main character you play, and then later on you switch to Biker. And that sort of gets explained a bit later, obviously, because he wears a motorcycle helmet and he rides a bike. Yeah. So Jacket's story it's the first, 12 chapters in the game. The game has about 15, 16 chapters in total. So the first 12 chapters of the game, you play as this guy called Jacket. The game starts, and you're basically told by a weird hobo in an alleyway how to kill people. That's the tutorial for the game, and it's one of those weird things where, because they're teaching you how to play the game, the hobo says things like press the WASD buttons to move around, and it's, at first you're like, this is dumb, this is a typical video game bullshit, and you kill a bunch of guys, and then the game starts for real, and you're like, that's kind of weird. And the first thing that happens is you get introduced to these 3 weird animal characters.
Yeah, they're sitting in
these 3 characters wearing animal masks, and you're like, who the fuck are these people? And so there's a horse, there's an owl, and then there's a chicken. Yeah. And they have names. I won't really go over their names, but each of them has a certain sort of personality. The horse is kind of like, oh, how are you doing? Are you doing all right? You look terrible. You should rest. The chicken, not the chicken, the owl fucking hates you. The owl's just real
He's
angry.
not a fan, yeah.
And probably the most interesting is the chicken. And the chicken is the one who asks the questions. There's about 7 questions in total throughout the game. And the chicken asks you these really weird questions that just make no sense. Like, straight off the start of the game, the chicken is asking you things like, do you know who I am? Why are we having this conversation?
Yeah.
You're like, I don't fucking know. What is this? And it's weird because after that happens, you just wake up in your apartment.
Yeah, and then you go to the phone.
And you go to the phone.
And you go do a mission.
And the phone tells you, hey, your package has arrived. It should be at your door. And you go, and it's a chicken mask. And you're like, what the fuck?
Yep.
And then it tells you to go to somewhere and handle some business, or like go.
It's always
It's always something like, you know,
drop off the tenement, or like go pick up.
Or it's like, I need you to babysit my kids. Make sure you give them lots of discipline and be
there's
discreet.
a pest problem there. Can you just make sure you clear it out?
Can you go eradicate the pests for me? And you know, so you go to where it is, and it turns out it's usually
you murder the shit out of
you
everyone.
go to a place and you just fucking murder everyone.
Kill literally
that's there.
everyone.
And it's a weird thing because when you play the game, if you know, most of the time nowadays, people know what kind of game they're buying. You know, they know, you know, when you look at Hotline Miami, you're like, wow, this is a really violent game where you kill everyone. It looks fun. I'm going to play it. So you go in with the expectation of kill everyone. So that's what you do. And that's what the game asks you to do. So you spend, you know, a long time just fucking murdering all these people.
You murder a lot of people in that game.
And
it's complex and it's difficult.
Oh, yeah. Like, the gameplay itself is just fantastic. It does a really good job of making it seem like really sort of significant, the amount of people you're killing.
Yes.
Because you die so easy. You die in one hit from anything.
From any character's one hit kill.
Yeah, so for being able to get through everything without dying, it's like, you know, it makes you feel good. And the first few levels, you know, they go like this, you know, no real hitch. After every level, you go to a convenience store where your friend works, and he gives you something on the house every single fucking time.
It's a different store every time.
It's a different store, but it's the same person.
Same guy.
There's nothing weird about that. That guy just has a lot of jobs.
Yeah, it's like because
he's kind of a bum.
It's like a salad bar. It's like a pizza store.
Yeah, so he just works at a bunch of places, and you just always go to chat because the first time you meet him,
you go to a video store at one point, and he gives you snacks.
He gives you a VHS
or whatever. Yeah.
Because the first time you meet him, he says something along the lines of like, "Oh, you know, like I haven't seen you in ages. Like last time I talked to you, you'd just broken up with your girlfriend." So you know that he's someone you know.
Yeah, you know him. He's not a stranger.
So, you know, you're obviously friends with him. And it's kind of weird because this whole time your character is a mute. You don't talk at all, and that is kind of important later. So you go through levels and everything's kind of fine, but every now and then you get weird hallucinations or things just happen which don't really make sense. And a lot of the time it's really subtle. Some of the more sort of gruesome takedowns with specific characters, they actually end up implying that that's not what happened. Like when you like fucking, you know, you rip someone's head off, or you like fucking just maul someone's face into oblivion, those characters that you do it to actually end up being not dead. And it's a weird thing where, because your character in their mind, they see themselves like beating the shit out of this person, that that's actually a hallucination.
Oh, okay.
And that gets dropped later on, which we'll get into a bit.
Yeah.
So basically you go through the game and about a couple of, you know, around like the 3/4 of the way through, you end up killing this guy wearing a motorcycle helmet. And this is actually where this is sort of the clue that not everything is as it seems. Because you know, it's a pretty hard fight. You kind of have to, you know, it took me a few times.
Yeah,
you know,
watching you do it.
Yeah, like it's real hard and fast. You have to do a bunch of dumb shit to end up taking him out. And you eventually fucking pommel his head in, and he screams some shit that doesn't really matter. And, you know, you continue the game. And that's really the point where shit just starts hitting the fan. Like, you see like dead people
Things
just
get
around.
really weird.
Like, your friend that normally gives you stuff at the end of every level is like dead and replaced with this weird guy who says things like, "Hey, we're closing up. You have to get out of here," and you just leave.
Yeah.
Like a couple of episodes later, after this weird shit happened, you end up going home. Your girlfriend, who is a hooker, who you picked up earlier in the game, is full of bullets.
Yep.
You walk into the living room, and there's a guy with an animal mask, and he shoots you in the head.
Yep.
Long story short, you don't die. You wake up in a hospital after from a coma, of that you were in for like a month.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the penny drop moment where at first you're kind of like, maybe, that's the end of it. He just had a coma. But the animal sort of, all of the 3 animals that you meet it's called like the animal living room. Those are actually hallucinations that you experience during your coma.
Yeah.
And your character's actually, when the game starts, your character's technically in a coma and you're just recounting what happened, which is why everything gets really weird and crazy up to the point where you get shot in the head.
Yes.
Because then obviously, that's the point that you remember last, and of course it would get really weird and fuzzy up to then. So there are actually answers to the questions that you get given, and you only really realize those answers once you hit this point of the level's called trauma when you're in hospital. Probably the most interesting question, or one of them's a prediction. He's like, I have 3 predictions for you. I think it's like I think the 3 are someone is not who you think they are. I forget what the second one. And the third one is on like July 20-something, you will wake up in a bigger house, which is the
It's when you wake up.
trauma level when you wake up in the hospital.
And then you kill everyone.
Well, you don't actually kill anyone in the hospital. You just leave. But your character at that stage, he's basically lost everything. He wants to sort of figure out who's giving him the phone calls.
Yeah.
So your character thinks that, and this is sort of Jacket's perspective, he thinks that all of the mob that he's been killing up until this point, so all of the gangsters or whatever, he thinks that those are the people who are sending him the messages for some reason, making them, because that's sort of all he sees from the perspective of him. Yeah. He's just like, oh, they're the bad guys. I obviously got to go kill them. So you end up, you break into their establishment. You end up, you kill the guy who shot you. So you go to the station, you kill them. Yeah. He tells you, oh, it's these people. Then you go kill those people. You have a fight at the end. There's some panthers. There's a ninja girl.
Yep, there is.
The guy shoots himself in the head. Game over. The game ends, and
the hard fight, by the way.
Oh, it's real fucking brutal. And the credits roll, and then you're like, oh, okay, that's Hotline Miami. But then you hit continue.
Yes.
And you get presented with extra characters, or extra chapters, sorry. And they're from the perspective of the biker.
Yes.
Who is the character that you kill pretty early in the game before the whole trauma thing. Yeah. And it's really interesting, because this is a really odd diametric shift.
Because this is hypothetically in the coma.
Yeah, so it's
happened, and you remember.
Well, no, it happens before the coma.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. So,
but you remember it differently
during the coma.
Yeah, so
you see them from effectively the other perspective.
Yeah, so there's so many different mechanical and like interesting things. So basically, the biker is getting the same phone calls from you, and you can tell this because one of the missions that you end up doing as Jacket is actually a mission that the biker says, no, I'm not going to do that. There's too political. Yeah. One of the early missions that you do as Jacket is this really, you basically assassinate 3 Russian like heads of sort of gangs, and biker is like, I'm not going to do that. That's way too politically charged. Yeah. It's boring or whatever. So that's how you know they're the same. They're being contracted by the same people.
Same person, yeah.
Except it's weird. So biker isn't a mute. He has a lot more dialogue. He talks to a lot of characters, and he doesn't actually kill everyone. Yeah. There's many characters that you don't have to kill, or you just can't kill. Yeah. Because the game just doesn't let you. He's also mechanically pretty different. He can't pick up weapons. You have 3 knives that you can throw, and you have a meat cleaver. Yeah. It's actually funny because if biker tried to do the mission that Jacket ends up doing, it would have been impossible. Because there are some sections where there's just a long hallway and there's guys with guns at the end. You physically have to use a gun. Yeah. You can't hit them with knives. So it's actually it's a weird thing where it's like, it's lucky that biker didn't do that mission because he would have died.
And then you're like, but then is it really lucky or is...
Yeah, or is it... Yeah. So you play through from biker's perspective, and you get up to the point where he's really sick of these fucking phone calls. So he goes to the phone company to figure out where is he getting these calls from, and when we did the playthrough, I just fucking murdered everyone in the phone company. You don't actually have to though. You can just leave them. Yeah. The only guy you have to kill is the guy in the big room who's like, oh, who's giving me these phone calls? It's like, oh, it's this guy, and you kill him. And then Jacket walks in, and he's wearing the chicken mask.
Yep.
And your character turns around, actually says something different to what Jacket
Yes.
thought he said. So Jacket, when you walk in as Jacket and you see Biker, he says, "I'm gonna fucking kill you." When Jacket walks in, you're playing as Biker. Biker says, "You should get out of here if you know what's good for you."
Yep.
And then the fights start. Jacket immediately runs towards the golf clubs that you have to go for as Jacket, which you do as Jacket. And you just run up and hit him, and he just fucking dies. He just falls over and dies.
Yeah.
It's just, he just fucking dies. He's so easy to fucking take out that it's just ridiculous. And it's a weird sort of idea where not only is it sort of reinforces the idea that Jacket's a really bad sort of perspective, bad narrator, unreliable narrator, because, he got fucking mopped.
In one hit, yeah.
He got fucking destroyed, and he didn't really hear what he said, but it also it serves a purpose that Biker as a character, though, he talks to people, he still murders fucking everyone. He doesn't have to murder everyone.
Yes, he chooses to.
Yeah,
he does.
And he takes out Jacket in one hit. It's super easy. It's a weird thing where, like, not only is at that stage of the game, you're actually pretty good at Hotline Miami, because you have to be. The game's hard. So it's sort of, it draws a parallel between the player improving at Hotline Miami, the game, and also Biker as a whole being a different person, which lets him succeed.
Yes.
Because when Jacket tries to take out who he thinks are giving him the phone calls, he's actually just killing more of the mob that the phone calls are telling him to kill.
Yes.
Because he's kind of dumb. He doesn't really know what he's doing.
He doesn't think.
He doesn't think. That's the thing. And
he just does.
When you're playing as Jacket, you play the whole game just really kind of mindless, because you don't really have any basis. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got no sort of.
Whereas when Jacket is introduced, he forces a certain perspective onto the player, because he has dialogue and he talks and he has an opinion.
He doesn't just have, because the other thing is that he doesn't just, when you're playing as Jacket, you get given questions, but as the Biker, you ask questions.
Yeah, that's another thing. Not
even that, but you don't just ask questions. You demand answers.
Yeah, and when you play a couple more missions as Biker, and you end up finding that it's this weird underground sort of organization that's been the ones giving you all of these phone calls.
Yeah.
There's actually 2 endings depending on whether you find fucking puzzle pieces throughout the game.
Jesus.
Long story short, if you don't find the puzzle pieces, the people you find at the end are basically just like, haha, but they just don't tell you shit. They just laugh at you. Yeah. You're just confused and you leave and the game ends. But if you do find the puzzle pieces, you find that there's actually this huge underground organization, and they've been trying to get rid of the Russian mob.
Yeah.
And that's basically it. And it's a really weird sort of storytelling idea where, like many, heaps of novels and things do this idea where you have, an unreliable narrator, where you have 2 storylines running in parallel.
Yeah. But
the thing with Hotline Miami is that you have these 2 storylines running in parallel, and they meet, but then they diverge. But neither sort of perspective is right or wrong.
Yeah.
Because as Biker, you find out who's been giving you the phone calls, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, you don't get. I suppose it's this case of, like, you get these differing perspectives, and you expect that having 2 perspectives on one issue would give you the answers you need, but instead, you just get the same thing happen.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't really know what's going on, but these characters are sort of, there's no definite, oh, that's why I'm doing it. In both cases, you end up thinking, well, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah. And I think a lot of it stems from the fact that it is just... Hotline Miami is a lot of questions.
Yes.
And again, the sequel answers a lot of them, and actually the sequel makes the whole game make sense. But again, it's just like a blip on the actual radar of it. But yeah, some of the especially the questions that you get asked by the 3 animal heads, and even the who the animal heads are themselves, the actual names of them, is you have the horse is called Don Juan, which is a weird... this is some weird research. It's a reference to, like, someone who is known as being, like, a womanizer.
Yeah, it comes from Shakespeare.
Yeah, and some people draw the parallels where, well, if it's that character and they're being really nice to you, at some point in time you actually find out that the person under the horse mask is a female.
That makes sense.
I've yet to find where, but apparently that's a thing. And some people say, well, maybe that's the representation of the hooker.
Could be.
Because she's kind of like the female version of a womanizer, because she's a prostitute.
Yeah.
And that would explain why she's nice to you and why, she asks like, oh, you look really terrible, you should rest, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
The owl, who's real angry, his name is just fucking, like, goddamn Rasmus, which is just the name of the mask itself that you get.
Yeah.
The owl mask is called Rasmus. He's really fucking pissed at you, really angry. That could represent the mobs that you're killing, or the Russians,
Yeah.
Like, they would fucking hate you.
They're just the opposition.
The owl says things like, I didn't fucking invite you here, what are you doing? That's what Jacket does.
Yeah.
The coolest one is the chicken. Because Richard, which is the chicken mask, is the first mask you get. It's the mask you get given...
So it's you.
And early on, the chicken says things like, I recognize you. It's like, I've seen you before. We're gonna meet on May 5th.
Yeah.
The first level of the game is on May 5th. So, and then,
yeah, it's kind of wrinkled my brain a bit.
Yeah, and then the chicken is one that asks you questions. And one of the funny questions is, why are we having this conversation?
So he's kind of so then in the coma, he's self-interrogating as to why all of effectively why he did the things that led him to be in the coma.
Yeah, and he's trying to get himself out of the coma.
Yeah.
That's what some people think the answer to why are we having this conversation is.
To work out how to get out of this coma.
To get up to the point where
that makes sense because then it's then the whole storyline is before he wakes up is like a self-interrogation of like why did I do these things?
Why did I do these horrible
and
things?
Why did it get me into the position I'm in?
Yeah.
And then you get the answer from the biker's perspective, which is that because he doesn't listen, he's not smart. And he just follows and does what he's told. And that's why he's in that position. But you can't work that out unless you've seen everything before it.
Yeah.
So it's a story that's reliant on itself being told.
And there's the question, which is pretty much synonymous with Hotline Miami now, which is, do you enjoy hurting people? And the answer is, kind of, yeah.
Kind of you have to.
Like, you...
And you, as a player,
yeah, that's the thing. You get in, especially with the combination of just the visuals and the music and the gameplay. You get to a point where you really enjoy fucking slaying people.
It's intoxicatingly fun.
Yeah, and that's
kind of what that's kind of what the characters are feeling as well.
Yeah, and they, there's so many parallels that they draw between the player and Jacket that it kind of makes you feel, it really gets you close with him, which is why the biker's storyline is so effective, especially when you just fucking destroy, you just fucking annihilate Jacket.
And, even the fact that Biker turns up to missions with knives and a meat cleaver.
Yeah.
And
it's
Jacket turns up with nothing but his fists.
And it's a weird thing where... Jacket kind of just improvise on the fly. He does, he uses the tool he has, whereas, Biker clearly has a tried and true method. And 3 knives and meat cleaver, and he knows what he's doing.
And they're weapons that kill immediately, whereas Jacket goes in with his fists.
Yeah, which
the first person you kill, you have to beat the shit out of every time. That's... Of course he must enjoy hurting people. Whereas, Biker hurts people because he has to.
Because he's trying to figure out what the fuck's going on.
Yeah, so I guess in that way, it's, Jacket's interrogating himself as to why the guy, why Biker takes him out is because, ultimately, it's because he enjoys hurting people and he's not smart.
Yeah, and throughout the game, there's actually corpses of other mask-wearing people, within levels.
Huh.
So, you'll be going through a level and somewhere hidden in the corner, there'll be someone wearing, an elephant mask.
Yeah.
Which is someone else that they obviously called up and
they sent on this
mission and failed. So so it sort of hints at you that there are other people being tasked to kill things.
It's not just you and
and obviously they're being given these masks, and Biker, he's like, fuck wearing a mask. I'm just gonna wear my motorcycle mask. He clearly knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and
it's also interesting because you get shot by someone wearing a mask.
Yes.
So. It's a weird environment that you're in.
Yeah, it's very enclosed and it's
Yeah,
it's really it's a very strange way to tell such an interesting story.
Yeah.
It's an interesting way to tell a strange story.
Yeah, because the sequel, again, the sequel gives a lot of answers, and the developers have gone on record to say like, we're not making a third game. The second is what we wanted. The second is what we want from the series. Yeah. Which is interesting because a lot of games go for that typical 3-act, start, middle, end.
Well, particularly a game that's fun to play.
Oh, so, yeah.
They could, if they banged out a third one, the gameplay...
They'd make so much money.
But it's admirable that they were like, no, well, the story's done.
Yeah, because
the games are about the story.
Yeah, and then it really fits that idea of questions and answers. Like, the first game's like, what the fuck? And the second game, to its credit, we probably will come back to it, just explains everything.
Yeah.
Puts everything into perspective. And I think we'll no doubt come back to...
We'll have to do an episode once I've played it, but I like the idea that you go from... And it's probably quite... I imagine the idea behind the second game is that once you have all the answers, it's way less satisfying than you expected.
It's an interesting... Well, because
isn't that kind of the point of the asking questions? Is that you ask questions expecting the answers to be satisfactory, but instead they always in that game end up just being fucking like they don't help you at all.
Yeah, well that's why, because the first game is really inconsequential. Like, the first game is really just... It's almost the catalyst for the second game, even though the second game sort of, like, bookends the first game's events, and really just makes it seem insignificant. But overall, it's just... Hotline Miami 1 has a lot of substance to its story, despite on paper looking
like there's not a lot there. Yeah. And I think that... that's one of the reasons that we love Dark Souls so much. It's why we love...
it does. It pulls similar things. Dark Souls.
Super subversive storytelling that leaves you with questions that are more important than the answers that you could get.
Yeah.
Because that ultimately is like what super good storytelling is in video games. Isn't... it's not like, oh, what happened to blah, blah, blah. How did you get here? It's... video games are naturally self-interrogating because... it's asking you to play through someone else's perspective.
Yeah.
And you have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? I could be out living my life. And the idea that Hotline Miami kind of self-reflexively asks you the questions, but of the player character, like, that's such an interesting idea.
Yeah, and again, it's really hard to do. It's really hard to deliver stories that involve the player characters so deeply.
And it's such and particularly when it's an unreliable narrator.
Yeah, and especially if you're trying to create that parallel between the player and the player character, because a lot of the times, most games that have good story, they achieve it through kind of just, creating the main character and then letting the player step back.
Yeah, there's no analog.
View it from the outside.
There's no analog in that world for you as the player. It's just I'm playing as Master Chief or I'm playing as blah blah blah.
Like when you play,
I'm Nathan Drake.
Yeah, like when you play like the Walking Dead game, which are amazing storytelling experiences. It is kind of just like watching a movie, reading a book. Like, it's, a lot of people rag on those games for not being games. I think they're fantastic. But they're not, it's not the same. It's not the same sort of play. It's a player-driven story, but it's actually secretly being driven by the developers the entire time.
It's a character, it's not a play, it's a character-driven story that the player plays a character, whereas Hotline Miami is a player-driven story. The same as Dark Souls. You are... a character, like, you play a character in the world, you don't control a character.
Yeah, and your actions that you feel are your own actions, just the game would just be like, I know exactly what you're doing, which is really hard to do in a game because you can't
predict.
You can't just you can't just have a game which just reads every action the player does, because then you won't have a game. From a developer perspective, that's fucking hard.
Because then you built a film like The Walking Dead, which is fine if that's what you're going for, but then I don't know. It's just Hotline Miami is such an accomplishment of craft. It's so impressive, and you should.
Also, it's made by like 2 guys.
Yeah, that's it. If you haven't played it, pick it up on Steam. It's fucking awesome.
If you live in Australia and you can't get the second game, just pirate it.
Yeah, the developers
have condoned piracy of the second game.
Because you can't get it. But it's great. Grab it on Steam. It's so good.
Yeah, and it's the kind of game where once you play it once, and you're like, oh, I really want to play it again. Just play it again. You'll blast through it.
Yeah, because when you get good at it, just gets more fun.
Yeah, especially because
it's just great.
Yeah, like especially all the different masks, which is an interesting sort of storytelling perspective. Because when you meet Biker, you can be wearing whatever mask. When Biker meets you, you're wearing Richard.
Yeah.
Could be a technology fault, or could be the fact that
no, it's because I think
the player Jacket doesn't remember what mask he was wearing.
I think Jacket always wears the Richard mask.
Well, it could just be he didn't remember. As a player...
Well, no, I think it's because it's a coma. he
doesn't remember what mask he wore that time.
Well, but what I'm guessing is that he might have worn the same mask for every hit, but because he's in a coma, he can wear a mask that lets him find guns more often because his brain is controlling the world.
Yeah.
Whereas in real life, you can't put on a different mask and find guns more easily.
Yeah.
So it might be a case of the fact that he's in a coma.
He's kind of controlling it like a dream.
He's kind of controlling it like a dream. I don't know if that...
Well...
You know.
You do get... From kind of... When you unlock new masks, they do arrive in the same box that you get the Richard mask in at the start of the game.
Yeah.
So it could be that in reality, Jacket did receive other masks, but because he's in a coma and he doesn't really remember properly, you know, he didn't know what he wore each time.
So he can kind of sub it in.
Yeah. In reality, he wore the Richard mask during that
when
mission,
he confronts the biker.
When he confronts Biker.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're playing it, he doesn't really remember, so you can just choose whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a bit odd because obviously the Richard mask doesn't give you any benefits. So mechanically, but obviously he's a character. He doesn't really understand.
But like I think that even the fact that the mask that he supposedly wore gives you no benefits again comes back to the idea that he's just not good at what he does.
Yeah.
And he's just a dumb guy.
He's just a guy wearing a mask.
Which again, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I don't know. Fuck, we could talk about this for hours, but we'll let you guys get back to whatever it is that you do when you're not listening to this podcast. You can, if you want to help support us, you can hit us up on Patreon, which is patreon.com/DCMworks. Shout out to Brendan A. McQuaid for being a champion from Patreon. And if you have any questions for us, hashtag AFApod or tweet us at DCM_works. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube. You find us all those places. Everything, as always, is in the show notes, and you can grab some sweet merchandise as well. And
put a t-shirt on your body.
Get clothed, and we will see you guys next week.
Goodbye.
The visuals are very well done, and the gameplay is super fun, and because those three things are there, it's exceptionally good.
I could do it in a heartbeat and make millions, but it would feel like just gouging my soul out.
Yeah, Jurassic Park's a little more like DDR.
If Shrek is a fairy tale creature, can he actually own land and want to kick them off? Where did that come from? You have to make a lot of shit up to make it up.
Yeah.
That's just the truth, buddy.